Alright guys, welcome back to another one. So today we've got to talk about this, because this is kind of crazy. This is probably got to be one of the biggest claims, I think, of 2026 so far, just because of how specific this entire report, or claim, or rumor, I don't really know what you really want to call this. It is very interesting, and if it is actually true, holy shit. But at the same time too, because this is a massive write-up that is so insanely specific and coming from a person that, like, dude, green zone bites? Who? What? When? Where? Who now? How now? Brown cow? Are you pulling this out of the deep abyss of your asshole? You guys should know that recently Bloomberg reported that Sony are in the process of closing down Bluepoint Games, the guys responsible for the excellent Shadow of the Colossus and Demon Souls remake. This person is claiming that they have recently spoken to 4 Bluepoint employees about exactly what the studio has been doing and the timeline of that. From the end of 2020, so the release of Demon Souls, all the way up to the recent closure of the studio. Now, we're only going to go over, like, the most interesting stuff because there is a whole lot of yap going on here. It's kind of insane. And again, you have to stop and question this because it is very specific. Secondly, how the hell did you get 4 people? 4 people! I don't understand if it was 1, but 4 people to break NDA. Basically, when a studio closure happens in any industry, the previous employees are handed a non-disclosure agreement, meaning that they can't talk about any of the certain projects or things that the company was working on prior. Otherwise, the lawyers are going to rip them a new one. This is why, like, whenever a studio is closed down, you never hear about what the studio may have been working on. And thirdly, why would people risk their NDAs for some dude called Green Zone Bites? What? Maybe I get it if it was like a known person within the industry, maybe like Nate the Hate or something like that, which I do understand Nate actually does know a little bit about this situation. Underneath this post, he has mentioned here that there are actually some truths mixed in, but a lot doesn't align with what I've been told. However, this post has done the rounds with 2.1 million views and almost 10,000 likes, and for good reason. Interesting point number 1, after the release of the Demon Souls remake, Bluepoint assumes that their next project would be something to do with Bloodborne, a remake in similar vein to something like Demon Souls or Shadow of the Colossus. Apparently, they started to prepare to work on a Bloodborne-related project, however, they did not get the green light due to internal politics of Bloodborne involving a fragile relationship with From Software, Sony, and the original IP. What this means is Bluepoint would have been preparing a prototype or a pitch of a Bloodborne remake to show to Sony in the hope that they would get a green light. Now, unless there is a circumstance that isn't publicly known, which could be likely, it's not publicly known that the relationship between both Sony and From Software is fragile. It's a little bit of a suspicious comment unless there is some unknown resentment from Software to Sony because of the Bloodborne situation. Otherwise, as far as we know, things are fine between the two companies. Shortly after this, Bluepoint were contracted to help out Santa Monica Studios to work on God of War Ragnarok, which is true. They actually did assist with the development of that game. As we know, in September of 2021, PlayStation acquires Bluepoint. Their first task was apparently coming up with an original project set within the God of War universe. This would eventually lead into the live service God of War game that Bluepoint were working on before it ultimately got cancelled. However, at the time, Bluepoint didn't realize that this was a live service game. Then in 2022, the studio starts prototyping for a Demon Souls type game that meets God of War. So I'm assuming that this is still the same project. Again, they are told that this is not live service. It mentions here that Bluepoint had a minimal design team and no game director, which is like serious disorganization. And this responsibility obviously falls into Sony's hand, as this is a Sony-owned studio by this point. So, I mean, if this is real, that's not a great look for Sony. From the end of 2022 through to the beginning of 2025, they're pretty much now working on this live service God of War game. Also, apparently a game director, and designers from Santa Monica Studio jumped into Bluepoint, which does make sense given that Bluepoint were working on a God of War related game, the live service title. But as we know, at the beginning of 2025, Sony pulls the plug on this project. So apparently last year was about Bluepoint pitching a bunch of ideas to Sony in the hopes that eventually one of them would be greenlit. At this stage, the studio is left with nothing to work on, so they need to start figuring out, okay, what's the next step? Apparently, they pitched a Jak and Daxter remake, a Resistance remake, and a PlayStation 5 version of the Shadow of the Colossus remake. So apparently the Shadow of the Colossus version would be slightly updating the graphics, adding 4 to 6 new bosses, some of the colossi that were removed from the original PlayStation 2 version. They also pitched the Bloodborne remake, which is claimed here that back in 2021, a small portion of Bluepoint spent about 2 to 3 months working on a Bloodborne remake. There were also 2 new original IPs that were pitched to Sony last year as well, that again fell under the same code name as this project right here. So possibly based on the progress that they had made on that cancelled God of War live service game, as well as another new IP known as Black Fan, or codenamed CP14. This was supposed to be a Ghost of Tsushima spin-off that apparently Sony liked. Sony gave Bluepoint 5 to 6 months to prototype it, so the duration of that would end March of this year. Next month. Employees felt it was going okay, even though it was never officially greenlit, and they were on track to hit a deadline, and then randomly, out of nowhere, Sony just shuts down the studio. This though, this right here, this part, this, and obviously the Bloodborne claim, yeah, that kills me. Like a lot. Like a lot. Because when we got the news back in 2021 that Sony had acquired Bluepoint, we were thinking, holy shit, Sony now have an official remake studio. This is a perfect way for Sony to revive a bunch of their old IPs. And surely one of these will end up being Jak and Daxter. It's one of the most iconic first-party PlayStation 2 games. People have been desperately begging to get Jak and Daxter back for some time. Clearly though, if the claim here is actually true, this means that Sony didn't like the idea of Jak and Daxter, Resistance, or a PlayStation 5 version of Shadow of the Colossus, as well as a Bloodborne remake. And at Bluepoint, weren't even given the chance to finish the prototype of this supposed Ghosts of Tsushima spin-off in order to get greenlit by Sony to turn into an official game, pulling the plug and effectively killing the studio a few weeks out of the deadline. Whether this claim is real or not, it wouldn't surprise me that at one point, Bluepoint pitched the idea to remake Jak and Daxter. This is what the studio was known for, and obviously a remake of that first game would have performed incredibly well. So yeah, I don't doubt for a second that Jak and Daxter has popped up in conversations at Bluepoint at one point or another. However, with the closure of the studio, I just don't think like there is any chance now like we will ever see some form of Jak and Daxter coming back. Remake, new entry into the franchise. I truly do feel like Bluepoint were the only guys that were going to make something like that actually happen. But I wouldn't say it's the same type of situation with a Bloodborne remake. Naturally, it would have made sense for Bluepoint to take on a Bloodborne remake after the release of Demon's Souls, considering the great job they did there for the most part. Some of the visual changes were a little bit questionable, but the gameplay for the most part is intact. They clearly know their way around a From Software Souls-like, so this is sort of the best studio to take on this task. But I personally can see something happening with Bloodborne at a later stage, sometime in the future. Maybe for the launch of the PlayStation 6. I think though, like most people don't even want a Bloodborne remake. They really only simply just want a remaster to be able to play the game natively at 4K and at 60 frames per second on PlayStation 5. Still to this day, it's a mystery why Sony haven't done this. Some people believe it's due to the closure of Japan Studio and the source code's lost. Other people believe it's Sony trying to respect From Software. Most of the reasons that are given just ultimately never make sense. It really just does seem like a case that Sony are keeping this IP locked in a dungeon. Over the past couple of years, Miyazaki has mentioned that he's not opposed to Bloodborne receiving a remaster and brought to more platforms, as he wants more people to be able to enjoy this game, but ultimately anything to do with Bloodborne is completely out of his and From Software's control, as Sony PlayStation owns the IP. Not long ago, previous PlayStation president Shuei Yoshida had mentioned that his speculation towards why PlayStation haven't done anything with Bloodborne is out of respect for Miyazaki, and that PlayStation would only go ahead and do something more with Bloodborne if Miyazaki were to be involved, but due to being so consistently busy with his own projects at From Software, this is something that just doesn't happen. Again, this is simply just speculation and a theory from Shuei Yoshida, who is no longer involved with PlayStation. Personally, I believe that if Sony really wanted to do something with Bloodborne, they absolutely would, with or without Miyazaki. I think that they're simply just keeping Bloodborne in their back pocket as an ultimate trump card due to the insane amount of anticipation for something more to come out to do with this IP. This claim, though, does have me shitting a little bit just because picturing a Bluepoint remake of Jak and Daxter, God! Does Jak and Daxter need to be remade? Absolutely not. It holds up incredibly well still to this day, especially the open goal version. But I loved Bluepoint remakes, and there is something about getting one of those nostalgic games from your childhood receiving a new coat of paint. Jak and Daxter still to this day is like a visually stunning game, and picturing a lot of the game's environments with modern graphics, yeah, that would have been the source. Honestly, that would have been the source. We still don't know why Sony decided to close Bluepoint. Most people speculate that it's due to poor sales of the titles that they have released. Even though Demon's Souls and Shadow of the Colossus are both masterclasses in the remake game, they didn't actually sell a ton of copies. I believe the public figure we have for Shadow of the Colossus is somewhere around 500,000, and looking at Demon's Souls, it's somewhere under 2 million. These numbers might be slightly higher now in 2026, as there haven't been updated figures for quite some time for both of these games, but they aren't huge numbers. Don't get me wrong, these are big numbers, absolutely. It's just that in the Corpo Sony eyes, your game has failed tremendously if it hasn't sold 5 to 6 million plus copies. I know for a fact this is actually how Square Enix operate. If their game has sold like less than 4 million copies, it hasn't met expectations. Anyway, it is a shattering situation, one of the dumbest decisions made by Sony in a long time. This report here, though, is very questionable. I don't think that this person, I mean, I've never heard of this person before. I don't know what their credibility is like. I don't know what their reputation is like. This is also one of the biggest gaming stories of this year as well, so it's also the perfect opportunity to make up some bullshit to drive some traffic. And if that's what's going on here, then, I mean, mission success. This guy generated 2.1 million views on Twitter. This has done the rounds. People very rarely break their NDAs when a situation like this happens, by the way. They are potentially risking their livelihood and their future moving forward. And to do it for some random-ass Twitter user is really interesting. That's where you've kind of got to, like, step back and question what the f*** is going on here. Are you sure, bro? Or is that jaw just a little bit loose? Not too sure about this claim. But on the 0.0001% chance that this is in fact real, this means that Sony have utterly failed Bluepoint games. However, guys, leave your thoughts and opinions in the comment section down below. I would love to know. Be sure to slippity slap that like button and subscribe to the channel to keep up with everything going on here. Big shout out to my wonderful patrons and YouTube members. I hope you're all having a fantastic day, and we'll talk again real soon.